Peter Soulsby. I'm one of the members of Parliament for Leicester. Been a member of Parliament since 2005, but before that I had been a city councillor in Leicester for many years, 30 years in fact, and 17 years as the leader of the council here in Leicester.
Okay. And what made you decide to go into politics?
Well, I actually went into politics as a student. I came to Leicester as a student and got involved in local politics. I got elected to the city council while I was still a student, actually, so a very long time ago now, and found it very rewarding because it's a very valuable way of actually serving a community, and it's something that I've always very much enjoyed and been privileged to have had the opportunity to do. I only became an MP, as I say, in 2005, really following the very sad death of my predecessor as Labour MP, Jim Marshall, who I'd worked very closely with, and having lost the seat at the by-election that followed his death, regained the seat in 2005 and then held it the last general election.
Okay. And I'm also aware that a number of your constituencies are asylum seekers. What do you think are the main challenges that they come to you with?
Well, inevitably, a lot of the people that I see are people who are coming in very distressed condition. But I think it is important to recognise right from the outset that there are many different situations that asylum seekers come from when they come to the UK, and there's no such thing as a typical asylum seeker or a typical story. Some of them are very, very distressing, and obviously it's my job to do what I can as an MP, and sometimes it's barely adequate and very little I can do, but to do what I can as an MP to try and be of assistance.
So generally, like when they come to you, what are they asking you to do?
Well, sometimes it's a question of the amount of support that they're getting, the inadequacy of that support. Sometimes it's practical issues about housing, and often they're coming to me for what little help I can give with their actual asylum claim. I have to say, it's often very frustrating because the amount of help I can give is very much limited by the way in which the regulations and the rules are framed. And in fact, what we are very fortunate about in Leicester is that we do have a lot of people working, often very hard and often in the voluntary sector and unpaid, to provide support and help, sometimes very practical support, but often very good advice that is, I'll be honest with you, often very often significantly better than anything I can offer, either by way of practical support or advice. But I'm happy to do what little I can to help the very valuable work that they do.
Okay. And during your tenure as MP, would you say the way this country treats asylum seekers has got better, or would you say it is worsened?
I don't know. I think all governments tend to react, to overreact to the way in which the plight of asylum seekers and the picture of asylum seekers as they get from the popular media, particularly the press, and that has often made me very angry indeed, because asylum seekers don't need the policies, with government policies with regard to where they're treated, dictated by the prejudices of the popular figure tabloid press. What they need is a properly balanced approach that recognises their plight, at the same time recognises that they, of course, if they're seeking asylum, ought to expect to be able to explain their situation and why they're seeking asylum, but does overall treat them both efficiently and humanely. And I have to say that the policies of successive governments have been neither efficient nor humane in the way in which they've dealt with people seeking asylum in the UK.
And do you have like an example of some of these policies that have been put in place as a reaction to the popular press?
Well, I think you only have to look at the work that's been done here in Leicester. And I've got here with me the latest of the reports on destitution in the asylum system in Leicester, which is the work that was done by the Leicester Refugee and Asylum Seekers Voluntary Sector Forum. It goes back to the point I was making earlier about the work that many volunteers and organisations do in Leicester, and you can see there both their general description and the case studies that are contained within it, the ways in which people are treated by the system and the results of that, which can lead us, as it does in the case of many of those case studies, to destitution and a reliance on the generosity of some very generous and well-disposed people. But the system, as I said, is not one that produces for them and for many others a humane outcome.
And how do you think asylum seekers who are in the UK should be treated?
Well, I think the fundamental has got to be a recognition of their common humanity, that they are deserving of treatment that is dignified, that is humane, and that is effective and efficient. Too often it has not recognised that we are dealing with human beings, and often, far too often, human beings who have suffered dreadful circumstances before arriving here, and that of course it's legitimate for any country to expect to ask those who are seeking asylum questions about their circumstances and about their background before assessing whether or not they're entitled to asylum. But that must be done in a way that does recognise that they have often suffered very considerably and must not be expected to suffer as part of the process of asking the legitimate questions that need to be asked about their circumstances and about their claim.
And one of the rules that, or one of the policies that affect asylum seekers is that they are not allowed to work.
Yes.
Is that right? Is that as it should be?
Far too often it's not. The plight, particularly of those who are unable to return, Zimbabwean refugees are a particular example of that, particularly prominent example of that, who, obviously it's not safe for them to return, even if they are not qualifying for asylum in the UK. It's just such a nonsense. It's just such a nonsense that they're not able to contribute to society, to contribute to their own upkeep by being denied the right to work. And the way in which the process works, systematically, has been so arbitrary. There's no adequate explanation as to why people in certain circumstances are allowed to work and people in other circumstances are not allowed to work. It's just crazy, and it's such a waste. It's so wasteful for the people themselves, and it's so wasteful for society, because so many people have got so much to offer. If only we gave them the opportunity to offer that while they're caught in this limbo.
And then the UKBA also actively seeks to enforce returns to war zones, dictatorships, famines, and countries that don't have stable governments.
Yeah.
Is that
No, I mean, of course people ought not to be required to return to situations where their well-being, in some cases their life, will be put at risk. And I think it is vitally important that any government policy on this respects that danger, recognises the risk that would be run by anybody who was returned to those situations, and make sure that they are able to stay in the UK till it is safe for them to return and to contribute positively while they're here.
And my final question has to do with the recent cuts that the country is embarking on. How do you think these cuts are going to affect asylum seekers and their access to legal services?
Right. Say first of all a little bit generally about the cuts. I mean, I don't for a moment pretend that we don't have to make some reductions in public spending. I think, because of the international financial crisis, we are going to have to find ways of reducing public spending. So I'm not one who denies that there is a need to deal with the deficit. I think it needs to be done over a period of time, and that's been the policy of my party, and it's one I entirely support. It needs to be done over a period of time, and it needs to be done in a way that does its best to protect frontline services, particularly the vulnerable. What we're seeing actually is some cuts that are being made for dogmatic reasons. People who actually believe that you need to reduce what they describe as the big state, which actually just means reducing public services, and they're taking the opportunity to take the axe far beyond anything that's actually necessary, really just because of their pursuit of that dogma. But to come back to the specific, what I fear is that along with those services and support to many of the most vulnerable in society, we will see cuts in the sort of support that is generally given to those who are refugees seeking asylum, and particularly to the support that is given by way of legal services and advice. I think that would be very, very damaging to the interests of these people, because so many of them are vulnerable. So many of them, as I've said, are already over-dependent on the goodwill of volunteers. They do need, along with the work of those volunteers, proper professional advice and support. It is very limited already, and for what remains to be at risk, frankly, appalls me. And just reminds me again, as I started by saying, just how inadequate the help is that is given generally, and just how inadequate the help that I, as an MP, am able to give to people whose common humanity we all ought to recognise, whose common humanity we all ought to sympathise with, can deserve our help if we truly claim to be part of a civilised society.
So, what would your advice be to this government? What would you advise the government to bear in mind as it embarks on this program?
Well, I wish I could give them advice that I thought that they would actually listen to. My fear is that they are determined to take an axe to public services in a way that is indiscriminate, with a speed that is dangerous, and that will inevitably have very serious consequences for the most vulnerable in society, but also beyond that actually for our economy as well. But that's perhaps a bigger subject than we want to talk about today. I think my hope is that they'll see that it is unnecessary, that it is damaging, that it is dangerous, but I expect, I regret, that they're determined to go ahead with it, and that both makes me sad and very angry indeed, and particularly trying to serve the sort of community that I serve here in Leicester. I'm acutely aware of what it might mean for real people as a result of it, because it is real people that we ought to be concerned about, not numbers, not people, and certainly not newspaper headlines. It is real people, and I just wish that the government would recognise that these real people need real help, and certainly don't need savage attack on the very limited support that they get, which can, for many, literally be a lifeline.
Sir Peter Soulsby, thank you very much.
Thank you.